When this ancient Buddhist temple in Cambodia was declared a World Heritage Site by UNESCO in 2008, fighting erupted. And in 2011, more clashes would leave 18 dead and thousands displaced. It was part of an old land dispute between Thailand and Cambodia dating back to French colonizers who drew a line in the sand and placed the temple, which is precious to both countries, on the Cambodian side of the border. To definitively anchor the Pravya Temple to Cambodia, officials applied for World Heritage status at UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. This was the last straw for some in Thailand.
ผมก็คิดว่าการเมืองมีส่วนขัดแย้งกันอะไรสักอย่างเนี่ยนะครับการเมืองนะเอาประชาชนเป็นเครื่องมืออย่างนี้นะครับประชาชนไม่รู้เรื่องรู้ราวนะครับ
And while UNESCO has played an invaluable role in the promotion of education and protection of cultural sites like these, the World Heritage status can also be used as a political or ethnic flagpole for countries to plant when they want to highlight a specific part of their culture while simultaneously undermining local minorities. Myanmar, for example, has applied for World Heritage status for the ancient city of Mrao-U, a historic site where the Rohingya were the targets of a genocide in the surrounding region just a few years earlier.
There's an awful lot of gunfire and big explosion noises outside. That's just the Myanmari army just firing rifles and explosions and stuff.
In addition, the number of World Heritage sites awarded by UNESCO have jumped to over 1,000 since the initiative started in 1972. A trend that goes beyond preservation and is spurred by countries hoping to wrangle tourists in to visit their most famous landmarks and boost local economies. So how did an organization that has done so much to promote education and preserve culture get entangled in a political chess match that undermines the very sites they are trying to protect? And as global tourism booms, has UNESCO become a travel agent for countries willing to pay to get their countries on the map? This is the story of UNESCO's system error. Founded in 1945, the United Nations Organization for Education, Science and Culture was created to promote peace, security, and education. Its role would later expand to include the protection of some of the most important cultural sites on Earth. Scholars most familiar with UNESCO will point to the monuments of Nubia in the Nile Valley as one of the organization's most important achievements.
The Nubian Monuments Campaign is really the sort of hallmark of UNESCO's Global Heritage Program. It's really an icon of global solidarity and collaboration in preserving endangered heritage.
This initiative was kicked off when the Sudanese and Egyptian governments decided to build a dam, which in turn would help in the development of agriculture in both countries. The problem was some of the most important monuments of ancient Egypt would be submerged and destroyed. 22 monuments and thousands of artifacts were moved to higher ground or transported to museums around the world for preservation in an initiative orchestrated by UNESCO. And with that, countries started asking for assistance in the preservation of important monuments and sites around the world.
There were many, many requests to try and save these incredible sites, usually from infrastructural development projects like dams.
As the requests poured in, the World Heritage Committee was created and would meet once a year to determine which sites brought forward by country members would gain World Heritage status.
They decided to come together under one convention. So whether it was a natural or a cultural site, these were locations that were seen to be of importance to all of humankind.
With its second meeting in 1978, 12 iconic sites were named. Since then, World Heritage sites have ballooned to 1,121 sites across the globe.
What's really happened since the 90s, and particularly since 2000, is that countries get very, very competitive about trying to inscribe as many sites as possible and to really secure the World Heritage brand at all costs.
Part of the reason why countries want the World Heritage stamp on their sites is global tourism, which has grown to astronomical proportions since commercial aviation became affordable, going from 25 million tourist arrivals in 1950 to 1.4 billion in 2018.
Now that we are saturated with information all around, a World Heritage label sort of makes you stand out, let's say. So then it becomes a competition between countries rather than collaboration.
The most powerful decision makers at the World Heritage Committee meetings are the 21 states that are chosen to be on the World Heritage Committee. And they are the ones that decide whether a site is inscribed on the World Heritage List or on the list in danger. They will be approached with incentives or threats to support other countries.
As of 2019, global tourism represented nearly $3 trillion, and with countries around the world vying for a slice of the pie, competition and lobbying have become part of the World Heritage game.
The brand has a lot to do with the international tourism, but it's also a reputational capital. It speaks to a country's ability to preserve sites, that this is a country that has an enormous heritage.
But tourism can have an adverse effect on the preservation of the site.
Visitation has to be regulated, otherwise everything gets destroyed. But unfortunately, in every country in the world, you have people who have vested interests in increasing tourism and increasing the impact of tourism in terms of bringing in economic rewards.
Welcome to Quebec City, a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
The UNESCO Heritage Site designation highlights Bridgetown's unique serpentine layout of its streets.
12 remarkable Czech historical sites have been written into the UNESCO World Heritage List.
For instance, in Cambodia with Angkor Wat, there's been this massive expansion of huge hotels around the site. The water table then affects the site because it means that the monuments start to fall and collapse.
It's all about inscription, whereas nobody really wants to talk about conservation problems. They're often, put under the rug, as it were.
But it's not just the degradation of the sites. The people that live in or near these sites can be affected as well. In Malaysia, the Georgetown clan jetties in Penang were saved from a development project when the site achieved World Heritage status. But this had the adverse effect of drawing in droves of tourists, as well as the construction of hotels, which also drove up prices.
After UNESCO listing, the shophouse price gone up by 10 times. The tenant that can't afford to pay the rental just move away. So I think more than half of the residents has been moving out. Most of the houses, they have shops, it's closed down, all turned into cafe, and cafe. Hotel, or hotel, that's all. I feel that the city has no soul, but I don't regret to do the UNESCO listing. We want the people to benefit from the economy and from this UNESCO listing in terms of economy because they are not very rich.
But that's only half the story. In 2011, UNESCO recognized Palestine as a country member, which in turn led to the United States and Israel cutting off their funding. The US has since left the organization in 2018, while maintaining its right to apply for new World Heritage sites. The US was its biggest contributor, and its departure has had a crippling effect.
They took a 22% budget cut. The US was already several $1 million in arrears to paying UNESCO its dues. And then we have seen, again, a decade of them not paying. So it's crippled the organization financially.
China has now become an important player for UNESCO, becoming the highest contributor to the regular budget, topping the charts with 55 World Heritage sites. It's now tied with Italy. As China hopes to draw in tourism to some of its most important cultural and natural landmarks, it has also undermined and destroyed other facets of its culture. For years now, Uyghur Muslims have faced systematic persecution on a mass scale, which includes re-education camps. But China has also systematically destroyed an estimated 16,000 mosques, according to a report by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which studied satellite photos to show the destruction of cultural and religious sites.
UNESCO's greatest challenge is its inability to call out its member states. And it's always been a problem, but in terms of World Heritage and World Heritage conflicts and Indigenous rights and human rights, UNESCO is never going to come out and sort of openly critique powerful nations like China or Russia.
Meanwhile, China will host this year's World Heritage meeting, where countries lobby UNESCO for recognition of their cultural sites.
Millions of dollars go to creating dossiers that are used in the nomination process. in garnering support, in influencing people, in flying them down to your country to look at the sites.
And poorer countries, especially African nations, who account for only 8.5% of all World Heritage Sites, get left behind.
When African nations actually do nominate sites, what they feel they have to do is actually nominate sites of their own persecution. So you have colonial forts, palaces, churches for inscription. And then they, of course, get the support of the French, the Germans, the Italians, the Brits who colonized them, because they also see it as part of their history and patrimony. So that African nations don't always feel that they can even nominate the indigenous sites that are more important and more meaningful to them. So it's really inequity on many levels.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration has indicated that it hopes to rejoin UNESCO.
If we're on the outside, we have no voice. And that goes across the board, whether it's UNESCO.
Well, I always say that if UNESCO didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. And I think that the world is a better place because of the organization. Again, it goes back to UNESCO's early beginnings, really, where the founders of the organization were the victors of the war, and that was Britain and France. And so they wanted to hold on to their colonies, and the UN was a way to really do that. And we see that those legacies have really not shifted as far as they should have.
We're all part of a system. It's all interconnected. And if you don't take responsibility, and if you don't take the leadership in that sense, what are we left with? A shopping mall